Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Dale. I'm going to leave this up because I've actually only got 3 slides to share with you today. Bina, let me talk. Now, this project, I guess I should say, originated last summer. So a colleague and I delivered a workshop at a conference for teaching and learning, very specifically for political scientists. And one of the things we wanted to do was basically give staff, teaching staff, space and place to what we call play, experiment, and reflect on digital applications. And actually coming out of that particular workshop, what we found, some interesting really sort of results, because it wasn't what I thought would happen. I thought we would play with the applications, people would be introduced to some new ones. We talk about different applications online. But one of the things we found, which is sort of driving my research going forward in the second step, are really some of the preliminary results you see up here. People mentioned about lack of time. So no time release for actually experimenting or playing with digital applications, workload issues, lacking that space and the support to experiment safely. And what we mean by this is essentially people would try digital tech in their classrooms, but they'd always be a bit hesitant to do so because they'd be worried about the kind of sort of the feedback from students. If it's negative, students might put that into their course evaluations at the end. And of course, that has a negative impact for a lot of people in terms of that. So we see that people also mentioned, interestingly, a lack of institutional support. So either technical support, basically having an IT department of like 3 staff members serving 1,000 academics, not being given support for applications which cost money, but also in terms of more general support and having staff back again in terms of things going right, things going wrong. But also one of the things that was interesting that sort of generated from this workshop was who decides on what digital tech in the classrooms? Is it the lecturers? Is it digital education teams? Is it the university and institutions? And based on what kind of criteria, pragmatic ones, these are the ones we can access, these are the ones that are free, or are there more pedagogical issues at stake in terms of what's driving the use of digital tech? Is it the particular learning, particular teaching processes that we want? And then the last thing that came up as well was this idea that students' use of digital applications were sometimes overrated. So we sort of think, well, students are always on their mobile phones, they're playing in different things, but actually in terms of using digital tech for learning, that's something quite different. And not all students were as competent with using that digital tech. And so with this preliminary results, really, it kind of drove me to think, actually, what I want to do is measure across 3 time periods. I wanted to find out whether this idea of workload, this idea of space and experiment, and institutional support pre-COVID existed with digital tech. We know that in the pandemic, this is some of the things that came out from that survey, but also as we're coming out of the pandemic and lockdowns, what types of things are we seeing? And so I've created a survey, which is basically for teaching staff, because I want to understand their experiences with using digital tech. I want to know what they're using. I want to know what they're using it for, but also want to know what kind of support are they getting? Are they getting support from their departments in terms of workload balance? Are they getting support from a digital tech team within their universities? Because what I've found is actually, and this is very preliminary results, this is from the workshop last summer, but a lot of these things are also coming up in my survey. So I have to say, I've only just launched a survey for teaching staff, but what I'm finding are very similar things. People telling me, actually, I use things that I can. My university doesn't really have a strategy for using digital tech. It's kind of on me. Others on the other extreme are saying, oh no, we have a complete digital tech education team dedicated to providing us one-to-one support, access to different applications. So it's a real range. And what I'm trying to do is get a feel whether there's a differentiation as well across different countries, different regions of the world. So at the moment, my survey is launched across through my colleagues in political science in Europe, and I'm hoping more people will do it. But what I'm really interested in is trying to figure out where are we going? And in particular, as many institutions are moving more towards hybrid and high flex in the aftermath of the pandemic, I'm kind of wondering whether some of these issues which may have slightly appeared for some during the pandemic exist still, but also whether they've been exasperated. So just from sort of anecdotal discussions with people, I know that some institutions have dropped their tech support, but some of them are also considering moving more provision online. There's a bit of a disconnect in terms of then the learning for students, but also the support for staff. And that's sort of what I'm trying to look at and measure. So that's where I'm at in this particular part of the research project. But thank you. And I know it's probably not relevant to all of you because you might not all be teaching staff, but if you are, I would love for you to play with my survey for a bit. But otherwise, if you hear of any colleagues who might be interested, that would be great as well. But thank you all so much.
Thank you. I think you do raise some very important points here, and certainly as an institution, I remember London, certainly speaking from where I am based at Venice HDM, it's not just simply that, but it's also the level of investment that there's a willingness to put into this area. So we've come to the point where I think we're going to open it up for questions. Jonathan, would you like to go back to where you were and then carry on from there?
Right. So I think we have some suggestions that were coming in. I'm just hoping I could grab the link from there. This one. What's this one? This one. Oh, it's not letting me enter. It's not this machine. So these are the things that came in. So some of the statements there. Are some of the contributions from you guys. So as to whether BLE and there are people who are voting. So please keep them coming. This would be helpful for us to understand what it is that we would ask students around the level of awareness of some of the functionality that they have. Moving on from your presentation, Dale, I think it's really kind of both relevant. So we did the same thing for the teachers, and now we're interested to exactly ask what the students think around the digital kind of functionality that's available to them, because some students do this as if they were born with it, but others are not. And even from some disciplines, other students are not even wanting to use social media, but there are those disciplines who are actually into social media. And I could see that some of you, for example, downvoted this, and I probably as an educator, is that from an educator's point of view or a student's point of view? It raises that question, because I know that some of us are being excluded from their WhatsApp group, right? I know students, after your sessions or once you give your sessions, they are in their WhatsApp saying like, oh, person so did this and did that. And hear them. So once they have a complaint, they will tell you, oh, in our WhatsApp group, blah, 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 but they're not that concerned, right? And that's probably why some of us are downvoting it. But students are upvoting this, I'm afraid. If there's any more questions, you here.
Questions? Any thoughts on your own experiences with digital education as digital educators? We'd like you to make a comment on something that Dale brought up, which I think is quite interesting and it's going to become a bigger issue as time goes on. And it's about who decides on what technologies are used. And, you know, very often when it's kind of been that, it's down to the lecturer to decide how the modality which they use for their lectures. But, you know, increasingly there's issues of cost, there's issues of time, and institutions are under pressure as well to deliver things in a certain way. You know, you've got the OFS briefing down with institutions next, saying you've got to have pedagogical basis for how you deliver teaching and so on. So it'd be interesting to see how things progress in terms of who decides and what is going to be the basis upon which that decision is made. What technologies we use.
If I could follow up, only because I sit as a lecturer, but I also worked as a digital educator. So it's really interesting to me. Because in the pre-COVID period, I pretty much had basically full access to whatever I wanted to use digitally in my classroom, online and whatnot, I could do it. But as we went into COVID, there was still a bit of freedom. But I noticed that in a number of institutions, in particular, we didn't mention it, but for GDPR reasons, they basically relinquished that ability to choose what you wanted, and you were becoming much more streamlined towards particular things that had been checked for GDPR. And so there is then a limitation on what we can use unless the institution is willing to invest in experimenting. So we ran, as a digital educator, we ran a number of pilot projects with lecturers in particular to try and see what the use is, but also to get it then approved for that purpose. But it does then, as technology keeps developing, that actually there's not really a way to keep up with that in terms of that, you know, process as well.
And I think just tying up and bringing Akindele into this equation as well. Akindele, what is perhaps your experience with institutional support for digital educators in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I can only speak to my institution, which is Lautech Nigeria. When it comes to institutional support, actually we have been getting a lot of support from the institution and the management. A typical example is our tapping into the Association of Commonwealth, which had allowed us to be able to promote several of activities we are doing. We also had a lot of workshop institutional wide. So in terms of institutional support, it had been there. But the same cannot be said for acceptance level of the staff members. You know, people sometimes are a bit slow to change. So while institutional has been given a lot of support, acceptance of the staffs, even sometimes the students has not been as forthcoming as expected.
Yeah, because I guess in that same equation, we are worrying about the inequities that will increase as we expand our digital education role. I mean, certainly hearing what's happening in the AI front and tying up with what Akindele was also saying with proctoring, it almost brings up the question is it already outdated to proctor, because AI can interfere with so much of that proctoring mechanism, isn't it? Any further questions or comments? Yes, please.
Can I ask, do you think higher education is entrenched by the investment that we've previously had that is holding us back for the future? And by that, what I mean is, if you look at all of the primary schools and the junior schools that went online through COVID, most of them jumped on a Microsoft Office Teams platform to teach. They didn't invest in a VLE, they got collaborative tools, they got whiteboard tools, they got chat tools. Yeah. As institutions, higher education institutions don't seem to be wanting to jump into that Microsoft tool. You know, I'm trying to get my institution to get a space for students and staff to work collaboratively, just as teams. It could be Google, like just we're a Microsoft site. And for me, it's a no-brainer, but there seems to be reticence because, well, we've got a VLE that we've investigated. We've got a set of people who know how to run it. That doesn't matter. I've got a set of academics who know how to run teams because that's what the institution runs on. And it all seems to be a good excuse rather than somebody actually just jumping boldly in and saying, let's try it.
Just a note about this as well. So I'm involved in a digital project, digital campus project in the University of London. And I'm trying to kind of investigate and learn how the Teams and Office 365 can be implemented in the current sort of online distance learning which we offer. And the first question is, which capacity, for example, team can be used? So because we have a very well established virtual environment Moodle where all our courses are versus Teams, which is obviously being developed more and more. And for example, more applications being developed. And just quite recently, new application Teams class was offered. And then it becomes kind of quite difficult to make a decision because they kind of not contradict and not at the same time complement one another. So this is a dilemma for us. You know, we have to kind of make a decision which part of the course will be run, for example, in the VV, or which part will be used in the Teams. So, and nobody can give us kind of advice, piece of advice. We're making assumptions. So because thinking, okay, Teams, it's more kind of collaboration, maybe more for communication, whereas VV it's more like a hub for holding learning material, this sort of things. But again, we don't know yet because we haven't actually implemented this yet, you know. So, and eventually, hopefully, we will have a pilot to be able to do that. So we need a proper kind of data, gather this data to kind of evidence saying yes, so we're going in the right direction. So it's not easy to find how the other universities already come through this kind of process. So I'm trying to gather information, and I literally receive kind of mixed messages. Some universities embraced it and said, yes, that's wonderful. So we're using the Teams exactly as they say. But others said, oh, well, we don't have a proper direction. And that's why we have mix and match and literally chaos in some universities. That's what it is, you know, so because this must come kind of centrally, or some kind of decision must become centrally, and guidance must be given to educators how to use it, not like leave them to their own devices and say, okay, now experiment and think how you can sort of use this specifically piece of technology, achieve the learning outcomes, you know. So that's what actually happens, unfortunately, at some universities. So we try to avoid this, we try to make it more kind of streamlined, you know. But again, it's the first steps, so I have to say, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think we share that challenge with you. Jonathan, you had your...
Yeah, I think the issue that we're having at the moment, I believe, is that we are at the point where everything has been disrupted. And we don't know where it lies and whether the actual effects around the changes of this technology is associated with. Because, you know, pre-COVID, as we know, all of the educational technologies were struggling to get buy-in. And then COVID has compelled teachers to kind of went online, even parents for children, right? They were suddenly trying to get hold of this technology and trying to grasp how to use this. Because their children say, I can't get online, that's it. You know, but they have to get their children online to be able to join the class. So there's that, and then now we're in the pandemic period. These things have changed again, and it's not being talked about as to whether showing all the students, back in person in terms of the conventional universities, right? The ones who deal with in campus. But even this kind of themes that you talked about, it keeps on changing. So the kinds of readiness that teachers have, you don't know where you're ready and when you are ready. I'm a technologist and self-instructional designer. I'm a learning technologist by heart. But even myself, I'm using Teams, and suddenly, oh, where's it gone? It just throws you off completely. And you then stick to what's exactly you're used to, which is kind of like, I'm just going to share my screen, and that's it. I'm just going to do my lecture, because going through all of these apps that's available, not considering all of this licensing model that now we're going into, right? You go to one app, suddenly they're saying, oh, that's additional module, you'll pay another 10 pounds on top each month. You know, so I think these are the problems that we're experiencing
I
now.
think it's certainly make that last question or
So
second.
then you find that teaching through a virtual environment really is so one direction. You know, where's this collaborative learning, this discovery learning? Our students can teach you so much, yet we haven't found a platform for them to share anything with us.
Yeah.
We put them in a forum, we put them in a webinar, they can put their hand up and speak. But, you know, we don't work like that as academics or as senior leaders. We all share, we work on documents together, we collaborate. You know, our students, for those that are apprentices or out in industry, are already doing this.
Yeah.
We are sat in the dark ages of pre-1980.
I know, it's last, I just wanted to say, I guess it depends on what pedagogical underpinnings are pushing towards particular technologies and digital texts, because when you just mentioned about collaboration and how we do it, but our students aren't, I was just thinking, actually, I get my students to collaborate in documents. So I'll give them a shared document and they can annotate together, and I put them into small groups to annotate, and then they present on what they've annotated and they find the keywords. So I think it depends again on how you want to use it, but it does, I recognize it as a lecture. It means some of the material I would like to cover, I don't get to cover. I have to be much more selective because you're time framed
Yes.
in a different way. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, the nice thing about face to face, if something happens on your way to work and you walk into your lecture field, you can talk about it. But online, that instantaneousness has disappeared from you, and that shouldn't be taken away, because we are completely instant online. Because as soon as something happens, Twitter or Instagram or somebody tells us it's happened. Yeah, as educators, we're not harnessing.
That's a challenge on which we shall finish this session, because I do think this is where we are all growing, learning, growing at quite a pace. So thank you very much to all our speakers. So thank you.